What's happening, everybody? Andy back with another video, and today's topic we're going to cover is VO2 max. Some of you are probably wondering what VO2 max is. It is a measure of maximal oxygen uptake. Why is that important to note? Because it's a scale. It gives us a marker. It gives us biofeedback onto how our training adaptations are, whether you are doing cardiovascular exercise, weight loss exercise, or you're doing strength training exercises. This also correlates to a lot of different metrics to allowing that training to pursue, or we understand where those progressive overload markers are. A lot of people who just walk into the gym have no clue on what 100% effort feels like. They think they know, but a lot of them really have not perceived that. And there's a lot of practitioners out there who kind of fail to grasp the idea of training up to it. So we get comfortable with you that when we put you above 70%, you're not going to freak out. Okay, so it's a test, it's a stress test. Like in most clinical settings, we call them stress tests or cardiovascular exercise stress tests, where we put you on a treadmill, we put a mask on you, and we measure how much oxygen you can breathe in, how much clean O2 that we could put into our system versus how much CO2 we're breathing out. And there's a crossover between the O2 and CO2. We also measure the heart rate in accordance with it. We measure lactate as it comes with it. So we'll hold your hand off to the side, punch your hand like we're doing a diabetic strip test, but it's a lactate strip test. And then we will measure what lactate level you're at. Those are the main markers for we're achieving a maximal oxygen uptake, or we're achieving a maximal effort from there. And it gives you the idea of what that feels like, okay? So there's a lot of people out there that kind of demonize the idea of a stress test or a VO2 max test because it is enduring, right? It does cost you time, it costs you effort, and it does put you above what you normally feel like is 100%. And we really blow the mold out there. So with knowing what those training target values are, or what that 100% is, we now tell you with a 95% confidence interval what your training target values are. So if you want to know what your fat burning range is, what your active recovery range is, what your high-end, high-intensity training ranges are, the range for you to improve cardiovascular fitness. And we can also take this number and relate it towards the frequency of how this training should transpire. But also, as we were talking about with lactate and heart rates, it gives powerlifters, strength trainers, strongmen, CrossFitters an idea of where that lactate and the CO2 VO2 crossover is at a lactate point, or anaerobic threshold, if you will, and we can detail how much time to recovery it takes you after a set to recover to do another hardcore set, whether it's 70, 80, 85%. So don't eliminate the fact that this is an aerobic test primarily to give you these numbers because you're not doing a lot of aerobic exercise. There's a way we can test that. I have come up with plenty of tests that get you into the criteria regardless of your situation. If you have a bum leg, we can put you on a bike, or we can do arm ergometer or arm ergometry repetition exercises, whatever your fancy is, we can measure that, right? So is it more related or higher accurate towards cardiovascular ambulatory exercise? Sure, right? But we can always find these other metrics and criteria to kind of find our cross-reference, and that's how we can measure things like rowing and ski erging. So we can measure a lot of these biometrics, biofeedback to help you achieve your goal. So what is it, right? Muscles need oxygen to do exercise, right? I put strength training here just to keep hammering in the idea that even though it is primarily called anaerobic bioenergetics, when you are crossing over your bioenergetics, which work as more of a ratio rather than a one-for-one exchange, you're going to shift your energy in and out of oxidative capacities, even if it is doing 20 bicep curls or box jumps, burpees into a pull-up. You are exchanging oxygen for that. And so that's the reason why I use VO2 to help measure strength training. it's a marked increase. And I say marked increase because if I took your test today and I gave you a number of like 30, regardless if you're male or female, that's more of like a baseline or an indicator of how healthy you are today, right? We're going to change your training, we're going to change your exercise protocol, and we're going to measure it within the next 60 days to see if there's a marked increase, right? Or I don't change anything and I measure you in 60 days and see if there's a marked increase. So that gives us a marker to understand positive health outcomes, okay? So a lot of this is going to be interrelatable, and I really want to start with positive health outcomes, i.e., let's say you're walking up a flight of stairs, you're pushing your trash out to the side of the street, you're going to go check your mail, you're walking your dog. How soon is it before you feel like you're out of breath? Or if you even, if you're not feeling out of breath, that's okay, this doesn't apply to you, but some of you who have this detraining syndrome or sedentary syndrome where you've done nothing but sit at a computer, sit on a couch, and really minimize the amount of workload that you take towards your exercise. That's going to impact, this is a mark to show you like where your health has been, and then we figure out if you have any kind of diseases. So from there, we look at in recovery and lactate buffering. I want to tie those two together, okay? So improved recovery and greater lactate buffering. So right here, we're going to look at a couple of things. I like putting stuff on a chart. It just hammers the point home. This black line represents lactate thresholds or lactate elevation. And the red line, we're going to say is like your heart rates. So with the lactate, we're going to train. I'm going to put a crappy dashed line right here because I didn't draw the red line out far enough. All right, so right in this area here, we have our VO2max, it plateaus, but at the same time, our lactate threshold right here skyrockets. And so we see that's a crossover from strength training, okay? This is when our anaerobic threshold has been triggered and we're now eliminating 90% of our oxygen intake because our muscles are now working purely off glycolysis or ATP, CR pathophysiology there. So with, or bioenergetic. So what we see is that being your optimal zone, whatever heart rate that is, we'll say 190, it should give you a couple of minutes and we will track how fast that heart rate deviates down. So that's why I had this huge slope right here, because within the first 2 to 3 minutes, you should see almost a 60% drop in your heart rate. So from 90, it should drop down 60% of that. But also for people who are not into strength training, this also gives us target zones. It does have some carryover to strength training. So if you know what your fat burning zone is, or your recovery zone is, or your training zone and so forth, all of this kind of works well with each other. It's just more accurate towards aerobic exercise. So with that being said, it gives you a 95% confidence interval. That 95% confidence interval is highly accurate. It's laboratory quality, it's laboratory controlled, and you get a score that you can, hang your hat on. So what is the difference here, right? Training zones, some of you have probably watched other zones, whatever. I'm going to give you the crossover with VO2 and heart rate training. It's going to take me a couple of minutes, so I hope you're still with me, right? With, you've probably heard before something like your fat burning zone is 60% heart rate, okay? So let's say you're a 20-year-old person or a 30-year-old person. 30-year-old, which would be 220 minus 30 equals 190. Okay, this would be your HRM for max. Okay, so I'm going to put that little m because this is going to be, we're going to get a little lost in the weeds here. We take that 190, and the common math is 60%, which comes to 114 beats per minute, BPM. Okay, but is that 60% of your VO2 max? Okay, that's the major change here, because if that's not reaching the right stress or the right zone, this is undertraining you. This is not giving you aerobic benefits. This is not helping you. Will it fall into the zone? Maybe, but let's do the math and figure that out. So we do a test, okay, and we'll use the 190 again. We'll call that 190 BPM HR for peak. Okay. Now, what we should have analyzed during the test, or know beforehand, what your resting heart rate is. On average, it's 60. So we're going to use 60. We're going to subtract that 60. BPM HR. We'll put a little R for resting. That gives us 130, right? We'll carry the BPM down here. But now we need to throw the 60% in, right? So times 60% gives us what? 78 BPM. But we're not done yet, right? One more step. Here we go. We got to bring and add back this number. So plus 60 gives us 138 BPM at 60% VO2 max. Okay, so you can see the 138 to the 114. There is a huge change difference between these two numbers, where this method is not directly related to your actual fat burning capacity, whereas this number, 60%, is not exactly there either. It's overtraining some. We want to dial it back to 40, 45, maybe even 50% in the range for your fat burning, 50 to 60% for your recovery, your active recovery, and then so on and so forth. So we want to know these numbers. That's the reason why we, as the average Joe or average Jane, want to take a VO2 max, so we understand what our positive health outcomes are, how good we can recover, because as we do strength training, we buffer lactic acid after the set. How quickly can that turn around? And that's very important for your tactical athletes too. And then we also understand what our training target zones are. So I hope that helps clear up a little bit, probably not. During the test, I'll do another video whenever I do a test, but just to give you an idea, the ideal test is going to be off of a treadmill. It's the, I guess, the quintessential test, where we put the mask on, we put a heart rate monitor on you, we'll check your O2, and we'll also test your lactate, which is like your blood glucose testing. We'll puncture the side during intervals. The treadmill will increase pace or resistance, and we call that a ramp test. So we're going to measure this lactate, and we're going to figure out at what point does your lactate spike and skyrocket, and how long does it take for it to come back down. So it's a pretty valid test nonetheless. We can do it if you're not a runner. We can do it if all you can do is walk. We could do it if you're 14. We could do it if you're 92. There's reliability statistics on every age range of the life cycle. Another great benefit is that it shows how well we can stay tight in our core through exercise as well. So I'm kind of like dialing back or taking a step back in this. But as the treadmill increases, think of walking up a hill. You're not always going to be walking up a hill like this. You're eventually going to start leaning into it so you can keep your weight forward and keep your balance. So what will happen is when you're running, and you start getting a little fatigued, your hips are going to start sagging because you're having to open up your stride. And then your upper chest or your upper back is going to start sagging over your lower back, and it's going to cost a lot of energy to keep yourself retained. You're going to start breaking your form down. That's also another indicator that you're reaching your VO2 max. So I like throwing in that one because a lot of people want to hear the word core, they want to hear functional training, they want to hear all these fancy terms about what it takes to get to these goals, and that's how we do it. We measure it off of VO2max, we look at all these biomarkers and biofeedbacks, and we give you a report based on whatever it is. I can test you outside of a lab. I have the resources to do that. I can do this in my own garage if I wanted to. So give me a call, let me help you. Or at the same time, if you already have a trainer but can't do any of this metric testing, that's okay. I'll work with you, I'll work with your trainer, and I'll toss you a little discount there too. But the ideal solution here is for you to start changing your aspect of what an average Jane or Joe is to what can I do to be a healthy American, okay? My name is Andy, and if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments.